Last but by no means least is a good friend of mine who demonstrated really how social selling worked. When I came to Singapore 10 years ago, I used LinkedIn before Sales Navigator and social selling had even been invented. And I reached out to people in Singapore, and Miguel was one of those people who responded and said, yes, you look a bit strange, but I will meet you. I have no problem with that whatsoever. And since that day, myself and Miguel have kind of worked together, have looked at how we could build brands together. And he has been phenomenally successful in working for places like Nokia, PayPal, Singtel, and MediaCore. And now he is an entrepreneur and a classic entrepreneur in terms of content marketing. So you enjoyed Neil before in terms of his content marketing. Miguel's view on content marketing is fantastic too, and also inspiring. So do put your hands together for the last and the fantastic keynote speaker of the day, Miguel Bernas.
Okay. Is that okay? Hi, guys. So first of all, I want to thank Chris Reed for putting me on last and for putting me in between you guys and drinks. And second is, I want to thank all of you for hanging around and waiting until this last session. So thank you very much. There it is. There's my magic wand. Let's see if this works. Expelliarmus. Okay, good. Yes, my name is Miguel. I have had a really, really messy career. And when you've had a career like mine, where you've kind of jumped along different industries and different roles and different companies, all the logos you see here represent a career of almost 30 years, and that's not even all of the logos yet. And you realize that there are two kinds of companies you will get to work for when you're doing a job interview. The first kind is the one who will look at a resume like mine and say, this is fantastic. You've worked in so many different industries. This is great. This is really interesting. You'll have a very wide depth of experience. And the other kind of employer will look at my resume and say, I don't want to hire this guy. He has no loyalty. He's never stayed in a company for more than 4 years. But at least for me, I like to think that there's a theme to all of this madness. I've worked in a lot of media companies, in television, in print, in online. I've also worked on the client side, on the brand side, working for, as Chris mentioned, Nokia, PayPal, Singtel. And recently, I have started my own consultancy, and I do a bit of work as well with black marketing. People sometimes ask me, what's my role at black marketing? I am CMO at large, and I also provide a fashion counterbalance to Chris Reed. Okay, that's my job. All right, so if you're here today, you're interested in content marketing. I think Paul was the one who said in the earlier session that content is the fuel or the diet that drives social selling. And that's very true. Now, if there's one thing that I want you guys to remember, to take away from my talk today, it's that content marketing is not just another tactic. It's not a case where you go back and say, okay, I'm convinced, I'm going to do my ad campaign, I'm going to do some Facebook ads, I'm going to do my regular paid search and all of that other stuff, and then a little bit of content marketing. No. That's not what I'm talking about. I think if you're going to do content marketing successfully, content has to be at the heart of your marketing strategy. And I'm going to be talking about how brands should be approaching their marketing in terms of transitioning from a campaign-led kind of marketing strategy to a content-led kind of marketing strategy. And I'll talk a little bit about how you get from here to there. But first of all, we have to put stuff in context, right? If you're a marketer, this should be a familiar sight. It's kind of something for me that I kind of run home to every time I get confused about what's going on. And because so many things in the digital media environment, so many things in marketing environment and customer journeys have changed so much over the years, I keep running home to mama. And this is what it looks like for me, right? So let's first look at a kind of a traditional marketing funnel or customer journey. And it goes from awareness, first of all, and If you're as old as I am, awareness used to be a case where it was driven by television, print, broadcast media and stuff like that, what they used to call mass media. Then there was the consideration stage. As people kind of got closer to the buying decision, they would start to think this brand versus that brand. And what drove that was either what they read in terms of reviews in magazine or newspaper articles, or it was word of mouth, right? And then finally, they made the purchase, and the purchase was usually made in retail, right, in store. And at that moment, the things that were driving you were things like standees, cardboard cutout things. Remember those? They still exist, right? Things that make you say, okay, this is the product to buy now. So when you walk into a store and you're looking for shampoo, and there's 200 brands of shampoo there, all of them are fighting for your attention. And then finally, loyalty, right? And usually, before it used to be, again, took the form of some kind of a newsletter, like an actual printed newsletter. And as you'll find, many of the things that we do today across all digital channels mimic in some shape or form something on this marketing funnel. And one of the big changes is that this all used to be quite linear, right? You kind of went from one to the other. Whereas today, you have a digital media environment where people are kind of jumping all over the place. And I'll come back to that idea as well. Here's another aspect of the traditional advertising and marketing model. And this is pretty much what has existed pretty much for over 100 years, right? There's the consumer on the left, trying to get to the content that they're trying to get to on the right. And the role of the brand, the role of the advertiser, was to interrupt that process, was to intrude, was to get in the way. And as the consumer was making their way to the content that they want, here comes the advertiser going, whoop, wait a minute, before you see that, let me show you this. And if you think about it today, even though we traditionally think of this in terms of you're looking through a newspaper and then you get interrupted reading your story by a full-page ad, or a 30-second commercial on the radio in between your favorite songs, or 10 minutes of ad breaks in the middle of your favorite TV show. Even today, if you think about how you scroll through your Facebook feed, some of that content is content from your friends, i.e. the content you're actually there to see. And then there's the stuff that interrupts your journey along the way, what advertisers stick in front of you. So the irony is, even though a lot of the medium has changed and the technology has changed, the downside is that a lot of advertisers, a lot of marketers still very much think within this interruption, intrusion mode. Now that would be all fine if consumers stayed the same, but consumers have not stayed the same. And digital media came along and pretty much ruined everything. Why have they ruined everything? They've ruined it for a couple of reasons, right? First of all, this whole thing of intruding your media consumption experience is just not cool anymore, right? People are annoyed with it. Here's a little anecdote. When I was working for MediaCorp, one of the things that my team would do every year is that we would manage the social media for the National Day Parade. And every year, you would get more and more complaints about the National Day Parade broadcast, talking about how there's so many ads. Everybody's complaining about all the ads. So we actually checked and say, are we actually having more ads than in previous years? And it actually wasn't the case. And what we think it was is that there were people who were watching the live telecast on MediaCorp of the National Day Parade who don't normally watch television at all. So they're kind of seeing this weird thing that interrupts what they're trying to watch, called advertising, and it pisses them off. They find it really, really annoying. So again, more of these cases where you have intrusion as no longer an accepted currency. It's no longer a road tax that people are willing to pay. Raise your hand if you use Facebook. Should be easy. Almost everybody, right? Keep your hand raised if you watch videos on Facebook. Okay? And keep your hand raised if you have seen a video of less than 2 or 3 minutes long that's been interrupted by an ad. Keep your hand raised if you think this is an acceptable user experience. No, of course, that is complete shit, right? It's terrible. You don't want to see that. So much so that people are willing to pay subscriptions for services because they're getting premium content, but also because they don't want the advertising interruption. Would you continue to pay Netflix if they still stuck ads in between? No, right? You wouldn't. So this is the big challenge then. How do we then get away from this problem where consumers, because of digital media, are now completely in control? They now have the ability to choose what kind of media they want, whenever they want to consume it, wherever they want to consume it. They can even choose which device they want to be able to consume it on. The other big thing that's changed, of course, is that you now have something called the influence on authority inversion, where influence and authority is now determined by networks and not a minority. Like in the old days, that tip of the pyramid used to control all the influence. They were the government, they were the monarchy, they were state-run media, they were big corporations, etc. But now that's all flipped over. You have a situation where influence is now democratized and split over several individuals. And you have a media environment where anybody can basically become a media company, right? And this used to perturb us when I was working at MediaCorp, that there are YouTubers in Singapore whose YouTube content, some of which would have higher reach than some of the MediaCorp TV shows. And they're producing this stuff at a fraction of a cost, and it's run by a couple of guys, right? Probably shooting it with iPhones. So a brand is no longer about what we choose to tell people, right? What the brand chooses to say. It's now what people are saying about the brand. So this is what I mean about an inversion. Now, so if the bad news is that anybody can become as influential as a media company, the good news and the opportunity for brands is that that means a brand can be influential as well. A brand can also behave like a media company. A brand can also behave like a publisher. So the challenge is this. Instead of being in the interruption and intrusion business, instead of being all about pushing messages at customers, at potential customers and at audiences, whether they want it or not, and rather than being campaign-based, we now talk about a situation where brands have to learn how to interest and not intrude. Create content that's actually interesting. Create that content that the consumer wants to get to in the first place. So therefore, that you don't have to have any interruption involved. And the second is about pulling rather than pushing content at them. And finally, it's transitioning from a campaign-based to a content-based marketing strategy. This beautiful illustration represents what your reach looks like if you have a campaign-based strategy. And each of those peaks represent basically the peak of your advertising spend. It's a situation where the only way you reach your audiences is when you're spending money to reach them. Why is this the case? Because what you're essentially doing in this campaign-based kind of marketing strategy is you're renting somebody else's audience. And whether you're buying space on Facebook, SPH print publications, MediaCorp, etc., you're basically renting somebody else's audience. You're paying to access that audience. I used to work for a company that spent about $22 million a year. That was their marketing budget. And you know how much they needed to spend to reach their target audience? $22 million a year, right? Because they couldn't reach this audience any other way except to buy ad space on all of these other platforms. Now, if you transition to a content-based marketing platform, you're now talking about a situation where, as a brand, you're slowly building and nurturing and owning your own audience. And over time, rather than having this sort of up, down, that is directly linked to how much money you're spending, you're winning subscribers, you're winning followers. You're actually building an audience of your own that has signed up for your content. They've actually said, yes, please, here's my email address. Yes, please, I will click follow because I like your content and I want to see it, right? So again, you're not interrupting anything. You're not sticking something that they don't want to see. They are actually buying in to what you have to offer as a brand. And that means over time, your audience size just goes up and up and up and up. Let's come back to our marketing funnel. So today we're talking about content and specifically demand generation, which pretty much means we're talking about, for today's purposes and because we have limited time, we're only going to talk about the upper end of the funnel, right? And in the awareness and consideration stages, you basically your content needs to achieve two things, right? The first thing is that, the first thing, of course, is that this is the demand generation phase, which then ultimately leads downstream to sales opportunities, openings for your sales team. Ultimately, when people buy, they become part of your CRM, some kind of a CRM platform or some kind of a loyalty platform, etc. But again, today we'll just focus on the upper part of the funnel. So in the awareness stage, you're essentially talking about content that entertains or provokes, right? So don't forget, at this stage, you're still fighting for awareness of your brand. These are people who may be interested in the category that your brand is, but they may not even be aware that your brand exists. So therefore, there is an onus here for you to find a way to attract these guys, and that's in the form of entertaining or provoking. And then in the consideration phase, in the consideration phase, this is where you now start to inform, okay? So maybe now they're aware of your brand, and this is now about informing and educating. This is now when they start to get into things like, what makes your brand different from other brands? Which of the different products that you offer is the right kind of thing for me? And so when you're entertaining and provoking, the net takeaway you want the audience to say is, you want them to say, whoa, that's cool, that's interesting. That's just what I was thinking about. Who are these guys? I'm very curious, right? And I'm interested now in seeing more stuff from them. And maybe even, how do I subscribe? I'm going to sign up for their YouTube channel. I'm going to follow them on Instagram. I'm going to like their Facebook page. Or I'm going to sign up for their newsletter. Best thing of all, right? And as they get further down, the audience response then becomes, is this the brand? Is this really the right brand? Does it solve my problem? Which of their products is the right one for me? This sounds like just exactly the kind of solution I'm looking for. And ultimately, how do I get in touch with one of their sales guys? Or how do I buy one of their products? And further down, and then further down the funnel they go. Now, of course, all of this is about creating content that's good enough that the audience actually consumes the content willingly. And then you as the brand, the onus is all about how do you start to build a loyal following around your brand. And this is what you always need to think about. There are too many brands out there that just put disparate videos out on YouTube, stick a bunch of paid ads, paid content on Facebook that gets boosted and think that's content marketing. The problem with that is if you're not building over time, you're not thinking how to build up that orange line that I showed earlier. How am I building an audience that I own over time? If you're not doing that, then there's something huge missing. And again, in the big question of how do you get somebody to consume content willingly, this then becomes about how do you entertain or how do you provoke? In marketing, that's not always so easy, right? Because as marketers and as advertisers, our first impulse is to talk about ourselves and how great we are. And if you go in and start, this is why advertising uses language like the number one, the largest selling, the best known, et cetera, et cetera. But in this day and age, that sounds a lot like interruption all over again, right? That sounds a lot like intrusion. And so if you're really going to be able to entertain and pull an audience in, you're going to have to learn about the art of storytelling. Now, I know that there's a lot of cliche around storytelling and how everybody needs to be a storyteller. Earlier, Neil was talking about how People always claim that we are hardwired to tell stories. I actually think that people are actually more inclined to receive stories and to remember stories. If you think about it, in a lot of ways, stories are the collective memory of the human race. If you think about, organizations, heroes, people that we look up to, people that have formed what we consider today to be our values, they're all based on stories that you've heard in the past. But don't take it from me. Take it from a man who drinks and knows things. As soon as the clicker works. Whoops.
People. Armies.
Can't hear. Can you turn the volume up?
Flags. Stories. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Nothing can stop it. No enemy can defeat it.
So that scene, of course, was from the last episode of Game of Thrones. There weren't any spoilers in that one little bit, right? But basically, this is Tyrion Lannister talking about the importance of stories and how stories are the most powerful influence on other people. You know, much more than flags, much more than armies, much more than gold. Right? It's the stories that people buy into at the end of the day. And if you're going to be able to tell a proper story, the first thing that you have to, of course, understand is who your audience is. You really have to get to know your audience, because only by understanding your audience will you be able to fully develop the kind of narrative that interests them. Only by understanding your audience will you be able to cover the correct, hit all the right hot buttons for this particular audience. Now, let's take a typical sort of marketing segmentation, right? If you're a brand, if you're handling a product, you've got some kind of segmentation of your audience that looks something like this, right? So in this example, I'm using wristwatches just because I like wristwatches. So it's a good way of illustrating. On the one axis, going from left to right, you have function or modern features, and on the other hand, you have heritage and history. And on the vertical axis, you have affordability and luxury pricing, right? So typically, the guy on the upper right, for example, would be the type of guy that will only buy a Rolex or only buy a Patek Philippe because it's all about the brand, it's all about the heritage, and he's prepared to pay the luxury pricing. Whereas Mr. Hipster on the lower right here still wants some of those things, still wants some of the brand, and still wants some of the heritage and the history, but he's not willing to pay an arm and a leg on it for it. And if you think about the watch market, you can buy a $200 watch, and you can also buy a $250,000 watch. So there's quite a bit of range in all of this. But what people also have to understand, what brands also have to understand, is that when you're doing your marketing segmentation, when you're deciding what kind of audience you're going for, you need to have a much deeper understanding than just where people fall on two axes, right? Because you have to understand their motivations. Somebody was also talking about this earlier. You have to understand their consumption habits. You understand what motivates them. You have to understand what influences them. You also have to understand where you think they are in terms of their lives, in their careers, et cetera, if you're really going to be able to create the right kind of content for the audience that you want. And again, this is not necessarily, once you understand all of those things, the act of going about and creating stories doesn't necessarily come second nature to marketers. But fortunately, there is an industry that we can turn to that offers some toolkits for us, that offers some basic tools for us to be able to do this, and that's the movie industry. So I'm just going to, if you were here last year, I talked quite deeply about this, but I'm just going to cover two quick areas of lessons that we can all learn from the movie industry. The first is something called the hero's journey, which is the basis of the 3-act story structure. Pretty much every movie you'll ever see falls into this kind of storytelling format. In Act 1, you establish the hero in the ordinary world, right? This is his everyday life. You just you get a picture of snapshot of where he is right now before anything else happens to him. And Act 1 usually ends with some kind of choice. There's some kind of message that arrives that forces the hero to make a decision as to what action he's going to take. My favorite example, of course, of the hero's journey is Star Wars. Has everybody seen Star Wars, the original 1977 Star Wars? Yes? Yes? Nobody's watched Star Wars? All right, at the end of the first act in Star Wars, what happens? Obi-Wan Kenobi asks Luke to come with him and go to rescue the princess. Luke's aunt and uncle have just been killed by the Empire, and so what does Luke say? Luke makes a choice. And his exact words are, I want to come with you to Alderaan. I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father. Right? So that's the beginning of his journey. He then goes from the ordinary world into the adventure world. And there's a bunch of obstacles that he needs to overcome. There's allies that he makes along the way. He, of course, refines his relationship with his mentor character. There's a moment here which is the temptation, right? This is a typical element of every Hollywood movie, the temptation. This is the part where the hero confronts an obstacle and he's not sure if he can carry on, right? How many times has the hero said in the movie, I don't know if I can do this, right? There's always a part where the hero says, I don't know if I can do this, man. And at the end, there's in the sort of Act 2 climax, there's usually some tragedy, right? There's usually one really horrible moment where it looks like the hero is going to lose. Like everything, all the forces of antagonism in the universe are stacked up against him, and the hero has to overcome them. He's confronted with this moment. Have you guys seen John Wick? You know the moment when John Wick is tied to a chair and he's about to be executed by the Russian gangster? And the Russian gangster says, just because of a fucking dog, right? And what does he say? He said, your son took away the one hope, the one chance at a normal life. And he took that from me, stole that from me, killed that from me. That's all I got. That's my best Keanu impression. But of course, the hero overcomes that, right? He overcomes all of that, and in the end, the final act is always about a return to the ordinary world, right? He goes back to where he came from. Usually, he's either changed himself or he's somehow changed the world and made it a better place. The second tool I want to talk about from Hollywood are, of course, character archetypes. And there are a lot of there's basically 8 character archetypes that have been identified. I put some examples here. The hero, of course, is the star of the story, right? It's the hero's perspective that the audience follows. He's the one that makes all the choices throughout the adventure, throughout the story. The mentor character is usually there to provide some kind of assistance to the hero, providing that magic sword, or in the case of Gandalf, the magic ring, the thing that allows the hero to complete his quest. He doesn't make decisions for the hero, he just is there to provide that one thing that the hero needs. The guardian character is somebody who usually stands in the way at some point, usually somewhere around mid-act 2, right? The hero has to confront something, and he either defeats that person or converts that person to his side. The guardian might very well end up becoming an ally to the hero. My example here is Halle Berry's character from John Wick 3. If you remember, he has some kind of a history with Halle Berry's character. I can't remember her name. Some kind of history with Halle Berry's character, and she actually wants to kill him for something that he did to her. But of course, they become allies in the end. The Herald is a character that arrives usually towards the end of Act 1 with some kind of message or some kind of calling that forces the hero to make a decision, as we see from BB-8 in The Force Awakens. The Shapeshifter character is sort of like sometimes an enemy, sometimes an ally, shifts from one to the other, can't really tell, and could even switch sides many times throughout the movie. I don't think anybody represents that more than Loki from the Marvel movies. And so on, right? You've got shadow characters, the villain characters, you've got ally characters, and then you've got trickster or like comedy relief type characters, chaos elements in the story. And all of these will be familiar. And as we put together stories about the brand, you have to keep these in mind. There's no need to kind of reinvent the wheel. You can kind of fall back on all of these familiar things, all of these familiar archetypes, because they have been proven to be effective in hundreds of years, thousands of years of storytelling. Now here's a question. In successful content marketing, is the brand the hero of the story? Who says the brand is the hero of the story? The brand is the hero of the story in advertising, sure, right? In the kind of intrusion type of advertising that I was talking about before. That's why the brand says we're number one, we're the widest selling, et cetera, et cetera. But remember, this is about pulling, not pushing, right? This is about content that the audience consumes willingly. And that's because in this type of content, the audience is the hero. And what I mean by that is, as the hero goes through his story, as he progresses through his story, through his quest, the audience sees himself as the hero. He relates to that hero. The best movies of all time are the ones where the hero wins in the end and you feel like jumping out of your seat because you feel like you won too when the hero won, right? And the worst kinds of movies are the ones that actually fail to get you to have any kind of empathy with the hero. So who's the brand then? Of all the character archetypes, what's the best role for the brand? Well, my suggestion is that the brand should be the mentor. Because the mentor is the one that, again, provides that thing to the hero when he needs it the most, and it allows the hero to complete his quest. Now, again, mentor doesn't make decisions for the hero. All the key decisions in the story are still made by the hero. But the brand is there to provide that thing that enables the hero to succeed. And as these stories are put together, at the end of the day, what a brand needs to do is build and nurture this audience over time and get that audience to follow them. This is how Google suggests you structure your content across multiple platforms. They have a model which they refer to as the Hero, Hub, and Help model. Each of these refers to a stage in which the audience or the consumer is trying to do something. The hero part of the content is for people who are browsing. So these are probably like at the upper end of the funnel, as we talked about earlier. The help content is for people who are searching for something specific. So this type of content has to be easily discoverable. You need to have your SEO in place, etc. And the hub content is the stuff that you've got probably on your website and the kind of content that you offer to your subscribers, right? So this is the stuff that is about regularly engaging with. These are the guys who have already signed up for your type of content. But ultimately, what all of this is about, and this is where content marketing and demand generation really come together, is that this is all about leading your audience down a path. Right? You'll have all of this content across different channels, and each of them is designed for a specific part of the path to lead them to the right place. And it starts, a lot of content usually starts with something like this. Does this situation sound familiar? You know, it depicts somebody who is in a particular situation that is familiar to you as the target audience. And then it starts to introduce ideas like, we, the brand, are actually the experts in this field. Here's stuff about our history. Here's the kind of experience that we have with solving these types of problems. And most importantly, it communicates that the brand empathizes with you. We're on your side. We understand your pain. And start to introduce the idea that, hey, you know, we might have the solution that fixes that problem, which then leads to choose from our wide range of solutions, which then leads into, of course, call or buy now, right? So there is a path that you need to bring the audience down in order to get ultimately where you want. Now, a lot of this A lot of this, of course, may just very well be that you are catering to them for just that area that they're interested in. It may not necessarily lead to that final thing at the end. But again, to do content properly, you have to be able to keep their interest by just adding value, right? By providing all of this value that doesn't feel like all you're doing is trying to get them to buy something from you. Neil mentioned these guys in his presentation as well earlier. Two guys who are the founders of the Content Marketing Institute, Robert Rose and Joe Polizzi, wrote a book called Killing Marketing. And in that book, they refer to there's this phrase that I really love. And when you are asked by senior management in your companies, what are you creating all of this content for? Like, what is the value of this audience, this subscriber base, these Facebook followers, these Instagram followers, these YouTube subscribers? Like, what's their value to us? Well, their value to us is they are your pre-customer database. Pre-customer database means that they may not be your customer today, they may not be buying from you tomorrow, they may not even be buying next week, but because you've developed this relationship with them over time, when they are ready to buy a product in your category, you are the first brand they think of because you've already established this relationship with them. All right, here's a couple of examples of some brands that, in my opinion, are doing this very well. This is from a company called Optimove. They run a website, a content website. It's a magazine. It's an online magazine designed for MarTech people called PostFunnel. And the one on the left is basically the email subscription version. So this is what you get in your email inbox. And the one on the right is the magazine. Optimove is a company that's based out of Tel Aviv. They have 40,000 subscribers to this publication. Imagine that 40,000 MarTech people who are interested exactly in this type of content. And again, the stuff that's featured there doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Optimove. It's just talking about the industry. It's just appealing to this MarTech audience that also happens to be the people that they want to ultimately be able to convert as customers down the road. Here's another example, a little bit closer to home, from a company called Workday. So Workday specializes in basically enterprise-level software in HR, and recently they're also expanding their audience to include CIOs, CTOs, CDOs, etc. And they've started creating this content as well, which is built around digital platforms, but they've also gone and published a physical magazine called Smart CIO, targeting CIOs here. So the interesting thing is that there's a lot of interest that's been generated in this within the industry, and one of the obvious signs is that they're now being approached by some of their competitors who are saying, hey, can I be featured in your magazine? So again, this is all about starting to create that bond with a pre-customer database that you want to convert down the road. And finally, the big example, this is my final example, is a company called Jyske Bank. Jyske Bank is one of the bigger private banks in Denmark. So what they did is they realized there was a gap in the market that Denmark needed its own business news channel. And so they went and created one. They actually created their own business news channel.
Jyske Bank is one of the largest banks in Denmark. And for years, they were paying a lot of money for sponsorships. And they didn't want to do that anymore. They didn't know if that was a good use of their resources. So they created Jyske Bank TV, targeting to financial consumers, and they started to answer questions on this video channel about how consumers can save for retirement, how they can get checking accounts, savings accounts, do things with their lives financially. And they were starting to share information like a media company would.
We say that if you can't rely on the media, you have to become a media. And that's basically what we think.
My name is Rasmus Nielsen. I work as a host and journalist here at Jyske Bank. Well, since it started in 2006, we started doing internal communication on TV, and then in 2008 we started also sending to our customers.
Efter kickstarten går vi direkte på jer to, eller?
The hard part is not to produce the content, it's to get the right idea for the content, and then to get the big yes from the CEO and the company, so you're getting in there.
We have had our CEO call us and say, that wasn't my kind of story, but that's all right. I'm still here. You need to have that kind of CEO that thinks, okay, all right, I give you some freedom, and I won't intervene. But of course, he will have an opinion. But he believes that if you tell it as a journalist, people will believe it, and they will like it. It's been a long process about getting where we are now, because people are very skeptic about this. But every time we do a story where people say, "Oh, that's actually what we were talking about in the canteen," so great that you guys are talking about it also, even though it's kind of a bad story for us. But people are talking about it anyway. So if we don't talk about it, it will just grow bigger and bigger in the organization.
You earn the respect from the audience. You have to get good stories that go into people's hearts. And when you reach people's hearts, they will do the right things with the brain. Think like a publisher. Produce content that is relevant for your audience. You have to believe that this is the right way to go. And I don't think it's just the right way to go. It's the way you have to go.
So a couple of interesting things about that example, if you heard. One is that they actually operate an impartial news organization within the bank, and that they actually employ journalists, right? The guy actually describes himself as a journalist. And all of this is about adding value, providing something to their audience that the audience wants, primarily, more than anything else. And through that action, they're gaining credibility, and they're creating affinity between the audience and their brand. Now, of course, this is just kind of an introduction to what brands and what marketers need to do as you go down the path towards becoming a content-led marketing organization. And there are many, many different channels you can choose from. And you have to be able to map all of these different channels available to you, your Instagram account, your WhatsApp chat groups, or your WhatsApp customer service platforms, your Facebook page, your website, etc., and map across the customer journey where this content belongs and what kind of content you need to produce. And where you'll end up is something that looks like this, right? Where you actually put down here all of the different channels that you have, what kind of content needs to go there, and where in the funnel it belongs. And you'll notice here that the platforms are not mutually exclusive, right? Just because it's Facebook, it doesn't mean it only is there for the upper part of the funnel. There's lots of ways in which Facebook, across the marketing funnel, there's lots of content you can put in something like your Facebook page that communicates to your audience at different stages of where they are. And then you might have, clinchers at the bottom, like your email newsletter, that then provides the immediacy and the call to action for them to go and buy something. But then even further down, you also have content that you create to further enhance this relationship with customers who have already bought from you, so that they then become advocates and so that they feel better about purchasing from you again in the future. And they could be digital type of content. They could also take the form of events, right? So if you think about, for example, Dreamforce, Salesforce's Dreamforce, the last Dreamforce, I believe, had 175,000 attendees. So this is an event that Salesforce puts together. So people are paying to attend an event organized by Salesforce so that Salesforce can talk about Salesforce to potential customers. And they're paying to go and attend that. So that is the ultimate in content marketing, where you actually create content that's so valuable to their audience that they are willing to pay you for that content. And they're willing to pay you for that content that you give to them that has your brand all over it. And finally, that's what this is about, right? When you build content for your buyer personas, you're basically creating a relationship with people before any of your salespeople have actually met them. Before they've ever really walked into your store, you already have established a relationship with them. All right, so I'll conclude here. What you've just seen is basically a compressed version of a one-day workshop that I run for internal brand teams. I held one recently. It's a lot of fun. We do a little bit of storytelling workshops, and it's a great exercise to take marketing people outside of their comfort zone, force them to think like content creators, and really start to think about and put themselves in the place of their target audience. I've been Miguel. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram.
Big round of
Thank you.
applause for Miguel.
Thanks, Simon. Is that yours? No.